All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to today's online training called How to Make Change Happen. We're really glad that you're here. We're recording today's training so that you can revisit it at any time on our YouTube channel, and please do share it with your friends. I'm Emmy Taberge, Outreach Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. Before we get started today, we want to acknowledge that the work that we do in Maine is on unceded Wabanaki territory. We recognize the Wabanaki nations who have stewarded this land for time immemorial. We work alongside the Wabanaki nations, including in support of the effort to achieve state recognition of inherent tribal sovereignty. And Kristen, could we share the slides, please? Thanks. Next slide, please, Kristen. I'd like to take a minute for some introductions. On this slide, you can see some of the members of NRCM's outreach team that are leading today's training. Please go ahead now and introduce yourself in the chat, sharing your name, pronouns, and where you're zooming in from today. It's really great to see all of you here, including some familiar faces. For those of you less familiar with the Natural Resources Council of Maine, we have been Maine's leading environmental nonprofit membership organization, protecting our air, land, waters, and wildlife since our founding in 1959. Our mission is to protect, restore, and conserve Maine's environment now and for future generations by harnessing the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 30,000 supporters statewide and beyond. We want to send out a special thank you to our members who are on today's call. We cannot do this work without your support. And if you're not already a member, we encourage you to join NRCM today. Next slide, please. All right, let's get to it. We're excited to host today's 1-hour workshop where we'll go over the tools to be an effective advocate. In today's session, we'll break down the legislative process, share tips on connecting with your legislators, and talk about how we can build real people power together. After each section, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers covering the topics that we just covered. If other questions come up for you that are not related to the training, please feel free to include them in the chat or email nrcm@nrcm.org, and someone from our staff will get back to you with a response. Next slide, please. The elections in November have left many people wondering what the implications will be for Maine's environment. Based on the results of the national election, we anticipate that there will be attacks on bedrock environmental laws that protect our land, air, and water, and attempts to roll back the progress that we've made with clean energy. We will be watchdogging what happens at the federal level and letting you know the best moments to take action. And in this training, you'll learn about some of the effective strategies for making your voice heard, including with our congressional delegation. Here in Maine, we are pleased that many pro-environment champions were elected to the Maine Legislature, which is good news for our work in Augusta in the coming legislative session, where we'll have a big opportunity to make real progress for our climate and environment. These maps show the outcome of the 2024 election for Maine's legislature. As you can see, there are some partisan differences regionally across the state, but here in Maine, we have a very strong track record of coming together to protect our environment, and we look forward to doing this work with you. Democrats retained majorities in both the House and the Senate, which means that Democrats will chair our legislative committees in addition to having leadership roles in the House and in the Senate. Next slide, please. Here are photos of the two chambers of the legislature at the State House. On the left is the House of Representatives. There are 151 representatives, each representing districts of approximately 8,800 Mainers. On the right is the Maine Senate. There are 35 members of the Senate, with each senator representing about 40,000 Mainers. Maine's legislature is a citizen legislature, which means that legislators are not career politicians. Instead, they are regular people from our communities, which makes them very accessible, both at the State House, where you can talk to them directly, as well as within your community. Next slide. The legislators that were just elected in November will hold a 2-year term. In the first year of the session, legislators submit thousands of proposed bills, and NRCM reviews each bill that is submitted. We will track hundreds of bills over the course of the session that are related to the environment. The session will begin in January and end in June. And as bills are printed, they receive an LD number and are assigned to one of the 19 committees. Next slide. Each committee has legislators from both the House and the Senate and specializes in specific topic areas. For example, the Environment and Natural Resources Committee works on bills related to water quality, air pollution, climate change, and waste. The Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee covers issues related to land conservation and farming and forestry practices. The Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee works on issues related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and our power grid, and so forth. The committees will review the bills and give each bill a public hearing and multiple work sessions before voting. A lot of work is done in committee, so our staff spend a lot of time monitoring and testifying in these committees, and we hope that you'll join us. Next slide, please. Here's just a refresher on how a bill becomes a law or doesn't. After the committee hearing and work session, the committee members will vote on the bill. If the committee approves the bill, it goes to the House and the Senate for votes. If the committee rejects the bill, it's no longer considered. If the bill passes the House and the Senate, the bill goes to the governor's desk for her consideration. If the bill fails in either the House or the Senate, the bill is no longer considered. The governor has 10 days to sign the bill or veto it. A bill can become a law without the governor's signature, but if the governor vetoes the bill, it is sent back to the House and the Senate, where it needs a 2/3 majority vote in each chamber to become law. All right, and here are some of the best times for you to weigh in during the legislative process. Next click. Right now is a great time to introduce or reintroduce yourself to your legislators before they're too busy, including where you live and some of the issues you're most concerned about, and hope that they'll support. Next click. The public hearing is another big moment for action. Anyone from the public is welcome to attend public hearings, either in person or online, including to testify. Click. After the public hearing is another good time to reach out to your legislators, especially if they're on the committee that is considering the bill. And you should tell them how you want them to vote and why. It's also a good time to submit letters to the editor of your local paper or to meet with your legislator in person, either at the State House or in your community. Once the bill has passed through the legislature, you can turn your attention to the governor, including by calling, emailing, signing petitions, or writing letters to the editor. And finally, regardless of the outcome of the votes, another important time to weigh in is at the end of the process. Following up with your legislators or the governor to thank them or express your disappointment demonstrates that you've been engaged and are paying attention. It could also influence how they vote next time. All right, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Kate.
Hello, my name is Kate Phillips, and I'm the Advocacy Associate at NRCM. So NRCM has a great resource to help you learn about your elected officials, which we're going to go to now. This is our Take Action page, and you can scroll down to the Contact Your Elected Officials and then find your state legislators. Can put in your address. This is just NRCM's. And you can see in the first section, we have all of our federal officials, including the president, vice president, senators, and in the case of this address, Shelley Pingree from Congressional District 1. And beside the legislators, you see their contact information, social media, and website. And if you click the more with 3 dots, there you go. You see all of their office locations as well as their committee assignments. And then at the next section, we have your Maine officials. And the last 2 are your, a little bit below that. Yeah, there you go. County and municipal officials who you can contact for local concerns. All right, we can pop on back to the PowerPoint. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. So part of our job at NRCM is to keep our supporters updated on environmental bills as they go through the legislative process. And you can sign up for NRCM's Action Network to stay informed. We also have a legislative bill tracking webpage that will tell you about public hearings, opportunities to take action, and read NRCM's testimony. Next slide. This is our bill tracking webpage. In early to mid-January, when bills start to be printed, we will post them here with the LD number, NRCM's position, status updates, and actions to take. So this is a great page to bookmark if you want to stay updated during session. And our action network will send out an email anytime there is an important update on this page. It is really important that our elected officials hear from their constituents, so we highly encourage you to take action whenever possible, and we are more than happy to answer any questions as you engage in the legislative process. And with that, we have a few minutes to take questions about the first part of our presentation. Kristen, you can click to the...
All right. Well, it looks like not too many questions coming from that, so we'll keep on going. Go ahead, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Emmy and Kate, for that overview of the legislative process. Also want to note that we do have 2 other question and answer sections coming up, so feel free to think on your questions and either put them in the chat or ask us directly in those moments. So for those of you I haven't yet met, I'm Josh. I am NRCM's Climate and Clean Energy Outreach Manager. I'll be joined for this section by my colleague, Anya Fetcher, who is NRCM's Federal Policy Advocate. And I'll really focus here on how to make your voice heard at the state legislature, while Anya will provide some insights regarding our congressional delegation representing Maine down in DC. We can jump to the next slide here. So Emmy shared with you that our state legislature is comprised of over 180 legislators between the state House of Representatives and the state Senate. Since the election, leadership for these chambers has been determined through a democratic vote by legislators, and the results look like this. And we can jump to the next slide. As you saw on the map, Democrats do hold a slim majority in both the House and the Senate. And what that means is that they're able to have 3 leadership positions in both of those chambers. The Senate president is Maddie Daughtry of Brunswick, joined by Majority Leader Teresa Pierce of Cumberland, and rounded out by Assistant Majority Leader Jill Duson of Portland. The Republican Minority Leader is Trey Stewart of Aroostook, while the Assistant Minority Leader is Matthew Harrington of Sanford. And then over in the House, we do have a newly elected Speaker of the House, that is Ryan Fecteau of Biddeford, who took actually a session off and is now back as Speaker of the House. He's joined by Majority Leader Matt Moonen of Portland and Assistant Majority Leader Lori Gramlich of Old Orchard Beach. And then you see over on the Republican side in the House, the Republicans are led by Minority Leader Billy Bob Fockingham of Winterport and Assistant Minority Leader Katrina Smith of Palermo. House and Senate leadership are an important part of setting the agenda for a legislative session. They set that agenda for their respective caucuses and have a big role to play in determining committee composition, legislative priorities, and resolving disputes that might come up throughout the course of the session. So for all of you, wherever you live, I hope you reach out to your representative to make sure that you let them know what your environmental priorities are. But in particular, if you live in any of the districts of these representatives, all the more reason to build relationships with them, as they will be really key in setting the tone for the rest of the session. I should note here too that the committees have been determined just this last week. So you can actually go see what committee your legislator serves on by going to the committees page on the Maine Legislative website. And the committees matter because your legislator might be more focused on one issue or another over the course of the session, and it's good to know what their priorities are. With that, we can hop to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Anya for an overview of our federal delegates.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. I'm Anya Fetcher. I'm the federal policy advocate, and I run our federal program. So these faces up here might look familiar to you. They've been around for a few years at least. So Maine, just like every other state, has two senators. We have Senator Susan Collins and Senator Angus King, and they both represent the whole state. And then in our first congressional district, which is more like the southern Maine part, is Representative Shelley Pingree. And in the second congressional district, which is the larger chunk of land of northern Maine, but they divide by people evenly or pretty evenly, we have Representative Jared Golden. Our senators serve 6-year terms and the House representatives serve 2-year terms. And similar to at the state level, each of our delegates serve on multiple committees at the federal level. For example, Susan Collins is poised to be the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is a very powerful position. But they all play parts on various committees. And they do spend most of their time in DC, so they're a little bit less accessible, but when Congress is on recess, they can sometimes be spotted around Maine, and they do all have, a home base in Maine as well. We can move to our next slide, and I'll pass it back to Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Anya. Now, we're going to get into how do we influence the people who are elected to represent us once they are in office, which is really the name of the game here. The tactics you see here on the screen are tried and true methods to move our elected officials towards the outcomes that we want to see. I'll start by talking through how these tactics apply to our elected officials in the State House. And then again, we'll do a back and forth with Anya regarding how this might differ for our federal delegation. So first, I just want to really emphasize, and I can't emphasize this enough, how accessible our state legislators are here in Maine. I think that's really critical to our advocacy strategy. Most of them don't have staff, and while they play an important role, they really don't represent many people relative to larger states. As Emmy showed, representatives represent about 9,000 people and state senators around 40,000 people. So even just a few contacts about a particular issue really skyrockets the prominence of that issue for a given legislator. As Kate displayed, their contacts are all publicly available, so you can easily reach them by phone or by email, which is the first tactic here. Some might argue that this is the least flashy way to get their attention, but it's really the bread and butter of legislative advocacy. And I think you would be surprised how often they pick up calls or respond to emails when you reach out. You can also elevate your voice to the broader public by writing a letter to the editor to your local paper. This way, more constituents can be exposed to your message, and legislators are often scanning papers in their districts to understand where public sentiment lies. It also represents a good opportunity to reach back out to your legislator. So if you do publish a letter, send them that published letter and let them know that you hope that they've had a chance to read it. Next, we have petitions. This is a tactic we use to display mass support for an issue. Petitions are really about quantity, and signing onto a petition is a helpful way to ensure that there's some real constituent weight behind a message that we want to deliver to decision makers at the State House. My favorite in the left in blue here is public hearings and rallies. Delivering testimony at a public hearing is one of the best ways to capture the attention of decision makers and make your point directly to them. For high-profile bills, we may organize a rally in conjunction with a public hearing to make sure that legislators know that the issue is important to a lot of people in the state. Rallies can also take place, though, independently, with intention being to bring energy into a topic, to bring press out to report on some of our top issues, and to connect people in person around shared objectives that we hold. We've done this successfully over and over again throughout the years. This is, I think, something NRCM excels at, whether by packing 3 overflow rooms at the State House during public hearings on solar energy in 2019, joining in solidarity at Youth Days of Action at the State House or Wabanaki Alliance rallies over the past few years, or bringing attention to the harms that could have been caused by a Wolfden mine in the Katahdin Woods and Waters region this last year. So next is constituent meetings and lobbying. And I just want to note, these are fancy ways of just saying talking to your legislator. Constituent meetings are a great way to gather your friends that might live in your same district to have a group meeting with your legislator. These meetings can be some of the most compelling forms of advocacy, I think, because it allows for in-depth discussion and a captive audience. Lobbying is also incredibly effective and is basically the process of catching your legislator in the halls of the State House to communicate your issue to them. This is our primary tactic on State House Action Day, which I'm sure you'll all be attending this year. We generally hold State House Action Day in March or April, so do be sure to keep your eyes peeled for the date for that one. Finally, we don't want to overlook accountability. I think this is often overlooked and something the NRCM also really prioritizes. It's really important to follow up with your legislators after they take a vote to express your approval and gratitude for them taking that vote in the right way, or your disappointment if they voted in a way that you didn't approve of. In either case, reaching out after the fact shows your legislator that you are paying attention and that you do care about the outcomes of their actions. Okay, so we've ran through those 6 tactics, and I'll pass it back over to Anya to talk about how they might apply to our federal delegation.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. So while there is a lot of overlap in these tactics, between the state and the federal level, federal offices, of course, they do also pay attention to opinion media. They can be influenced by petitions and sign-on letters, and it's also important to hold them accountable for their votes. But some of the tactics do work a little bit differently at the federal level. For example, with phone calls and emails or letters, while the congressional members themselves don't share their direct email addresses or phone numbers, you can still reach them through these ways. So each office in DC has designated staff who answer phone calls. They check voicemails, they read emails and letters that are sent from their constituents. And so while you're unlikely to speak directly to the member, you will often speak to a real person if you call during business hours. Otherwise, you have the opportunity to leave a voicemail, and you should receive written responses to written messages. And I did note that someone in the chat had asked about handwritten letters versus emails. And I would say that in most cases, those can be more impactful. Handwritten letters can be more impactful than emails, just because it requires more time. It's not just a few clicks here and there. It actually requires sitting down and writing out the letter. And when they get that snail mail, that piece of mail in their hand, and they can read it and see your handwriting and your signature, that can often display a higher level of, caring and interest. And so if you have the time and the ability to send a handwritten letter instead of an email, I would always recommend that option. One of the other thing that's a bit different are the public hearings. They're not quite as accessible. For one thing, they're held in DC, so it's not just a drive to Augusta, it's a flight to DC. But there are occasionally opportunities for people to participate. For example, last month, Molly and Dana, who is the incoming executive director of the Wabanaki Alliance, testified during a House committee hearing to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there are occasionally opportunities for people to go to DC and speak up in person. And then the other thing that is a bit different is around the constituent meetings and direct lobbying. So again, unless you're hanging out in DC a lot, you're unlikely to really just grab the member in the hall and be able to get to them. There's a lot more obstacles to that, but you can schedule meetings with the delegate and or their staff in DC if you're going to fly in for some lobby days, which we do occasionally. Or another option is to connect with regional representatives that are in Maine at district offices around the state. So all of the federal delegates have multiple offices, as Kate was showing when she showed you the resource through our website that shows you where all of their offices are. And so you can set up a meeting with the staff there. And those offices are also a really great location to hold perhaps rallies or deliver petitions or sign-on letters in person. And the last way to maybe connect with your member of Congress is, like I said, when they're home during recess, you might see them around your neighborhood or at an event. And I mean, I've run into Representative Golden waiting for a flight to DC, and it's absolutely okay to approach them, introduce yourself and maybe thank them for something that you're happy that they supported, or let them know that you'd like them to support or vote a certain way on a particular issue. So that's a little bit about the differences, and I will again pass it back to you, Josh.
Awesome. I think that's our last back and forth. So we've done it. So this is not an exhaustive list, I should point out, of advocacy tactics that you could take, but I do hope that it helped to paint a picture of how we do our work alongside you. We can support you in any and all of these strategies, and we do really look forward to working with you to make your voice heard for your legislators. And in a second here, I'll show the resource that we have to ensure that you are equipped to be able to have those conversations and or deliver testimony or write a letter to the editor. We've got all of that information on our site, and you have all of us as a resource as well. Here we go. We're moving on to best practices here. These best practices really apply across all of the communication tactics that we just outlined. The first thing you want to do is make a personal connection. Stats and numbers are important, and they're things that we can help provide you to facilitate a conversation, but really emotions are the drivers of decision-making at the State House. Tell your story about why a given issue matters to you, and once you've relayed that story, be sure to reference a specific bill number or title to ensure that the legislator walks away from your conversation or communication knowing exactly which way you want them to vote on a given issue. You are the expert of your own experience, so don't be intimidated out of sharing why an issue matters to you. I think this is the number one thing people are concerned about in coming to the State House, is that they don't know enough about a topic. You know why an issue matters to you, and that's what you should communicate to your legislator. You don't need to know everything about an issue to be an advocate for it. We can help to provide expertise as well, but it's really about your personal connection to that issue. To that point, always tell the truth to decision makers, especially in this day and age. It's really important that we hold on to that integrity. If they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, you can just let them know that you can follow up with them after you've researched that, rather than making up an answer. And that really gives you a chance to contact them again down the line, and it won't undermine your credibility. So that's a really important point that I always make when we're in lobbying discussions. As we discussed before, you also want to make sure to follow up with them after they take a vote to let them know how you feel about their decision. So I hope you've all already contacted your legislators before the session to let them know that you're excited about seeing them in office and that you want them to pursue an environmental agenda. But these are some best practices for any future communications with those legislators. Next slide, Kristen. So this is a fun shot. We have a ton of these because we do a bunch of State House Action Days every year. And we gather at the State House to really show the power of the environmental movement and to talk specifically to legislators when you come with us. So we'll provide a training, we'll provide snacks, ensure that you are actually connected to your legislator in the State House. And it's really just a fun day that we typically have in March or April to highlight our environmental agenda and show our power at the State House. Our office is less than a quarter mile away from the State House, so it's a really great place to meet up and walk over together. Okay, finally, for our section here at least, I wanted to highlight our Take Action Toolkit yet again. In addition to being able to find your legislators, we have a lot of resources on how to testify at public hearings, how to write letters to the editor, how to conduct an effective email. We have a bunch of opportunities to take specific actions, whether those might be petitions or sign-on letters that we have. And so much more. So we'll drop that link in the chat, and maybe it already has been dropped in the chat by Ella, but I'm sure it'll be there as a follow-up as well, and it's pretty easy to find. There it is. So that was a lot of information. We can break for questions, and I did see a couple questions in the chat, so maybe we'll start there. Julia was wondering about the protocol for testifying. So a great question. As I mentioned, this is one of the best opportunities to communicate with legislators at the State House. Any bill that is moving through the legislative process has a public hearing at its committee of jurisdiction. So you have an opportunity as a member of the public to show up at a public hearing and provide your testimony to the legislators that sit on that committee about why the bill matters to you, and you can encourage them to vote for it or vote against it. You have 3 minutes. So I think one of the key parts about preparing is ensuring that you have written testimony and that you've practiced and gone through one time to ensure that you're within that 3-minute limit, because you do want to respect their time. There were over 2,500 bills last year or last legislative session, so they really have to move relatively quickly. So this is your opportunity to show up and make a statement about it. You also have to print 25 copies if you want to ensure that they're hanging on to the physical testimony so that they can read along. They might ask you questions during the course of your time, but as we mentioned, the key thing is to let them know that you can find an answer to the question. And what might end up happening, and what's happened to me quite often, is someone asks me a question and I'll say, I actually don't know the specific answer, but I'd love to bring that back to you during the work session. The work session is the next time they'll look at the bill, and you can come back and talk to them at the work session after you've done a little bit of research. So it just gives you another opportunity there. The last thing I'll just mention here is that ever since the pandemic, there has been a virtual option for providing public testimony, which is really great for accessibility reasons. If you aren't able to make it to the State House, whether geography or schedule, you can Zoom in virtually and provide testimony. I always prefer in person. I think it establishes a better connection, but it's really phenomenal to show up virtually as well if that's the way you can do it. So there you have it. We did have another question, and Anya, maybe you kind of touched on it. The handwritten letters.
Yeah, there was the one about handwritten letters, and then Maggie asked about leadership being only from Southern Maine, and if we think that will impact anything, make a difference.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Maggie. I do think it will impact things. This is something that we've seen increasingly over the years. Partisanship has been a really key theme, kind of unfortunately, of our political sphere. And that partisanship has increasingly become divided along the 1st congressional district and the 2nd congressional district. And we see that reflected in the way that the votes played out this year. So I do think, having House and Senate leadership on the Democrat side being Southern Maine representatives will probably make an influence, but it's not to say that other legislators that are not in Southern Maine that may represent you will not have a really important role to play in the process. Anyone else, feel free to chime in there about their perspective on the partisanship in the State House this year. But if not, I do see that Bill has a raised hand, so go for it, Bill.
This is mainly for Anya. I worked for some years on the staff of one of the U.S. Senate committees. And I think that one thing you've omitted is that frequently it's more important to talk to the staff than to the representative or senator, because they've got so much on their plate. They may not follow things closely, or they'll forget a contact because they've immediately moved on to the next constituent. So it would be useful, I think, and I realize that you want to be selective on this, and maybe it's what you do, Anya, rather than the general public, but to have some names of key staff members on committees where there's something pending. Another thing that is useful is to find people in other jurisdictions who have a connection with Maine. You might find somebody in Oregon, for instance, who went to college in Maine. Or you might find staff members on other committees or in other offices. But at least posting the name of the administrative assistants and the legal assistants for each senator, at least, which I'm more familiar with, and maybe identifying people on other committees who may have relationships. The committee that I worked on, I had a lot of contact with people on a committee that Senator Muskie chaired. And it was quite helpful because I was sympathetic to things in Maine and so forth. And the two of us could talk and make plans of something that one committee or the other could do. But there's a lot of reliance on staff work. And I think that if you're going to be effective, you've got to have a way of reaching the staff.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. You're right that the members themselves have a lot to keep track of, and the staff are outstanding resources. And more often than not, that is actually who you'll end up talking to because the delegate just has such a packed schedule. But yes, I will add that part of the reason that the staff can be so helpful and knowledgeable is that there are multiple staff for each delegate, right? So that the various issues, types of bills, and whatnot are divided up between the staff. So there are, for example, in Senator King's office, really just 2 or 3 of his several staff with whom I mostly communicate because they cover more of the environmental priorities. So you're right that they're often going to be more knowledgeable and able to really have a deeper conversation about some of the issues and understand what you're saying and maybe even answer some questions. I think that, you know, the nice thing about having a face-to-face opportunity with the member themselves is to, you know, hope that they themselves can hear your personal story and make that connection with their constituents. So it's important to have, I would say, a bit of both. But yeah, if you reach out and ask for a meeting and you're meeting with staff, don't take that as like, oh, this isn't going to be worth it. It's absolutely very impactful. So thanks, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I would just note that really highlights the difference, I think, between our state legislators and our congressional delegation, right? Our state legislators are generally individuals. There is an office for the Senate president and for the Speaker of the House that you can communicate with some staff, but really it's the individual you're interested in engaging. And at the congressional level, they represent hundreds of thousands of people and have several staff members. I was an intern for Shelley Pingree back in the day, so I got to see some of this firsthand. And the way that I would describe it is when you reach out to a congressional delegate, it's a bit of a funnel process. So if you have a specific question, you get funneled to the staff person who has expertise in that given area, and that's likely who you're going to be communicating with. So Anya has really great relationships with all of those staff for each of the federal delegates, and so we can help you navigate that system indeed. So I think we have time for one more question before I hand it over to Branya for our final portion here. And if no one's chomping on the bit, then we can save 2 more minutes for questions at the end. So on to you, Branya.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Branya Lechtman. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Manager here at NRCM. And so I'm going to talk about building people power. So a bit about the importance of people power, although I feel like a lot of this presentation has covered that, but also strategies to build the people power needed to make real lasting change. And then a little bit of time for questions. So next slide, please. So here are a few examples of what people power can look like. These are some examples in the past of rallies that have been held on bills that we've really cared about. You can see citizens talking to their legislators. But I also think it's important to highlight that people power doesn't always have to look this flashy. People power can be in living rooms or coffee shops or one-on-one conversations or calling your friends. They think that there's a lot of different forms. And I think as has been described, none of the work that we can do at the State House can happen without people being involved. Legislators are not going to be able to make the decisions that are necessary without, just in a vacuum. So next slide, please. All right, so before I dive into some more specifics about organizing and people power, after everything you've just heard, one immediate next step in terms of building out who can be involved in this work is with a lot of the next steps that Josh, Anya, and Emmy described. Think about 3 people in your life, 3 of your friends who have similar values or have been itching for ways to get involved recently. Think of 3 friends who you just want to ask to join you in making calls to legislators or setting up a meeting or calling your congressional delegates. So that's just like, before I go into anything else, something that you have the tools to do. Next slide, please. So I want to touch a tiny bit on relational organizing. So relational organizing is a tool within a broader organizing strategy to build people power in which individuals, groups, or organizations harness their personal networks and relationships to affect change. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying it's like using your community. So every single one of us on this call is part of a community. People listen to friends and family more than any other group, and that includes decision makers. Decision making is often inherently emotional. I mean, of course, a lot of it involves facts or knowledge on the issue, but often people are deeply moved by people that they know and people that they trust and people with stories that they can relate to. So next slide, please. So one very fun part about living in Maine is that there are never too many degrees of separation from our legislators, congressional delegates, or local decision makers. Sometimes there's really no degrees of separation at all. And so one way of thinking about our networks of people and how we connect to our legislators is by mapping it out. So I wanted to propose a scenario to all of you. So for example, your legislator is on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and you want to make sure that they vote yes on a bill that's scheduled for a hearing next week. Forgot to write this in the slide, but this bill is about lakes and protecting lakes. So what I would ask you to do after this or in this scenario is think about who you might know who has extra influence on your legislator. And I'm specifying extra because everyone here has influence on their legislator, but I'm thinking about like extra influence, like people that they might know more directly or have a stronger relationship with. So I was thinking about it. So for a bill that involves protecting lakes, I was thinking about like the 4 buckets of people that this legislator might listen to. So that might be impacted community members. So for example, let's say you have a friend who has a camp on a lake, or Sarah comes to mind who has a bed and breakfast that's also nearby a lake, or another friend who runs a fishing shop. So run through impacted community members in your district that you know. The next would be personal influences to the legislator. So you happen to go, you start thinking about that, like you happen to go for walks with your legislator's best friend, Tiffany, or your legislator's cousin happens to drive your kid to school sometimes. So just start thinking about those, like who are the legislator's close people if you know them, and how might you have some connections to them. From there, I would think about the VIP influences. So this might be like public officials or like community members that are well-known or technical experts. So you realize you have a childhood friend who's an ecologist who can speak well on lake issues, or the town mayor, for example, who sees the benefits that the lake has in their community. From there, you can also think about financial influences. So for example, does your legislator own a business? In this scenario, you realize your cousin who happens to run a business with your legislator. So it just helps break it down if you're able to map it out in a few buckets. So next slide. So from there, let's say you come up with like a lot of people and you can't really decide who to prioritize. I would then sift through and think about, okay, who do you have the closest relationship to? Like maybe Sarah, like you have a better relationship with than Joe, so you're gonna ask Sarah. Or like, you know, the legislator's relationship with their next door neighbor is actually not that great, but with their cousin, it's a lot better. So just start to like prioritize a little bit as best as you can. But if you only come up with a few people you actually have connections with, just go through all of them. Next slide, please. So what you could ask when you're starting to think about people that you would reach out to in this scenario is, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is they might have a really unique ability to call, email, or meet with the lawmaker before the committee vote and be able to tell their story, explain why they think it's a good idea for them to vote yes on this bill. They could be really powerful people to ask to testify at the State House. They could write and submit letters to the editor to the local paper. Or you could ask if they could lobby their lawmaker in the State House. Sometimes it's helpful to propose. I mean, you can start with like, I feel like the biggest ask could be, actually the bottom 3 are all like bigger asks than the first ones, but I think having a menu of options to see what someone feels the most comfortable with can sometimes be really helpful, especially when it's personal relationships that you're dealing with. So with that, I want to open up for questions. Ella, I'm going to pass to you afterwards to just give us a broad overview at the very end, but I know that was a very brief crash course, but are there any questions about what I brought up about relational organizing? All right. If more questions come up, we'll have a little more time at the end, so I'll just pass it to Ella.
All righty. Hi, everyone. My name is Ella. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the relatively new membership and partnerships manager here at NRCM. And I'm so happy to be joining you all today. I have a task of summarizing what you all heard today, and I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible and leave a few minutes at the end for extra questions, or to just give you a little bit of time back in your day before you go about your next appointment. As we heard today from my colleagues, there are so many opportunities to provide public input, and you have the power along with the community members to influence the outcomes. So use it. And we want to be here with you as a partner for that. Like Branya said, relational organizing is the most effective way to advocate for your issues. And if we can be a resource to you, if you want to bounce ideas off of any one of us, you can contact us anytime at nrcm@nrcm.org. And we would be happy to answer any questions. Shortly after this webinar, in the next day or so, we will send out a post-webinar email and survey. So the email will include some additional resources and links that we want to make sure that you bookmark. And we hope you can fill out our survey, which will let us know more about how you wish to engage with us in the future. So we look forward to hearing from you. Next slide, please. So just a few pieces of summary. These links have, the links have been dropped into the chat already, but just a plug again to bookmark NRCM's Take Action page. This is a fantastic resource that you will find very helpful throughout your advocacy journey. You can find your legislators' contact info, which Kate showed to all of you. You can view our bill tracking page, and it has some step-by-step tips on how you can testify. You can learn more about best practices for letters to the editor and op-eds and more. So please use that. And obviously, if you have any feedback on that, we're certainly happy to take that into consideration. Lastly, I just wanted to summarize a couple of the things you may have heard today, the ways you can actually take meaningful action when you click leave on this Zoom. First, if you can reach out to your legislators to introduce yourself, if you haven't already done that, we'd love for you to do that, share your environmental interests and concerns, and bonus points if you can invite 3 friends to join you for this kind of meeting. Couple other things I just want to flag for you all. We will have a legislative priorities webinar in the new year. This is a great way for you to learn more about what NRCM's priorities are, ask specific questions about the pieces of legislation and more. Save the date for Wednesday, January 29th from 12 to 1 p.m. We also will have our monthly climate action calls resuming in the new year. So stay tuned for more information on how you can join those. And just once again, the pitch to sign up for our Action Network. That is where you will receive urgent email updates and important actions you can take on bills that are of importance to the organization. Next slide, please. And just finally, as our membership representative on the outreach team, I wanted to reiterate what Emmy said at the start of the meeting, which is that our members make all of our work possible. We can't do it without our dues paying members and other supporters. So for those of you who are dues paying members, on behalf of the entire NRCM team, please accept my gratitude for that. 'Tis the season to really be expressing gratitude and want to let you know how much we all appreciate your support. And if you're not a member yet or want to make a special gift and help invest in our important work, please join us. We would love to have you, and you can send questions to nrcm@nrcm.org. They'll get routed to me, and I will be happy to answer them. But we appreciate you. We can't do it without you, and we thank you for your support. I suppose there's a little time for more questions if anyone has them. So I think our team will hang on for a minute or two just to see if anyone has anything else they want to ask before we close out.
I think
I'm not
Julie's
seeing anything.
sentiment is a great one to end on. Let's go. Let's make some change happen this legislative session.
All righty. They always say leave an uncomfortable silence at the end, but I think we're at that point where we've given the opportunity. Oh, question in the chat.
Looks like it's for me.
Can you, Archana, can you say more about what HR 9495 is? I don't have them all memorized, unfortunately. Oh,
Anya, this is the Stop Terror Financing Bill.
oh, thank you.
Yep. Also known as the nonprofit killer bill.
Yeah. So we have not yet said anything about it. I have actually just yesterday this came up on a call. So we're discussing if we want to take action, and if so, what we want to do. So basically, I don't have an answer for you yet in terms of our end of things, but I do know that there is some mobilizing in the state, and I'd be happy to connect you with some people who are definitely doing something, and obviously we'll follow up if we decide to put out any action opportunities or statements.
One great resource for that is the Maine Association of Nonprofits. They're working on this issue pretty closely. I think the Center for Philanthropy might be as well. But it's definitely being looked at from the kind of nonprofit association level, and I'm excited to hear we might be thinking through our own work on that. Any other final questions? I think if everyone's good, we should let you all have a wonderful day and happy holidays. And I don't know if anyone else on the team wants to share anything else before we end the webinar.
Thanks for joining, and we look forward to working more together in the new year.
Thank you.